Us and Them from Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim by Sedaris. When my family first moved to North Carolina, we lived in a rented house 3 blocks from the school where I would begin the third grade. My mother made friends with one of the neighbors, but one seemed enough for her. Within a year, we would move again, and as she explained, there wasn't much point in getting too close to people we would have to say goodbye to. Our next house was less than a mile away, and the short journey would hardly merit tears or even goodbyes for that matter. It was more of a see you later situation. But still, I adopted my mother's attitude as it allowed me to pretend that not making friends was a conscious choice. I could if I wanted to. It just wasn't the right time. Back in New York State, we lived in the country with no sidewalks or street lights. You could leave the house and still be alone. But here, when you looked out the window, you saw other houses and people inside those houses. I hoped that in walking around after dark, I might witness a murder. But for the most part, our neighbors just sat in their living rooms watching TV. The only place that seemed truly different was owned by a man named Mr. Tomkey, who did not believe in television. This was told to us by our mother's friend who dropped by one afternoon with a basket full of okra. The woman did not editorialize, rather, she just presented her information, leaving her listener to make of it what she might. Had my mother said, "That's the craziest thing I have ever heard in my life," I assume that the friend would have agreed. And had she said, "Three cheers for Mr. Tomkey," the friend likely would have agreed as well. It was a kind of test, as was the okra. To say that you did not believe in television was different from saying that you did not care for it. Belief implied that television had a master plan and that you were against it. It also suggested that you thought too much. When my mother reported that Mr. Tomkey did not believe in television, my father said, "Well, good for him. I don't know that I believe in it either." "That's exactly how I feel," my mother said. And then my parents watched the news and whatever came on after the news. Word spread that Mr. Tomkey did not own a television, and you began hearing that while this was all very good and well, it was unfair of him to inflict his beliefs upon others, specifically his innocent wife and children. It was speculated that just as the blind man develops a keener sense of hearing, the family must somehow compensate for their loss. "Maybe they read," my mother's friend said. "Maybe they listen to the radio. But you can bet your boots they are doing something." I wanted to know what this something was, and so I began peering through the Tomkeys' windows. During the day, I would stand across the street from their house, acting as though I were waiting for someone. And at night, when the view was better and I had less chance of being discovered, I would creep into their yard and hide in the bushes beside their fence. Because they had no TV, the Tomkeys were forced to talk during dinner. They had no idea how puny their lives were, and so they were not ashamed that a camera would have found them uninteresting. They did not know what attractive was or what dinner was supposed to look like or even what time people were supposed to eat. Sometimes they wouldn't sit down until 8 o'clock, long after someone else had finished doing the dishes. During the meal, Mr. Tomkey would occasionally pound the table and point at his children with a fork, but the moment he finished, everyone would start laughing. I got the idea that he was imitating someone else and wondered if he spied on us while we were eating. When fall arrived and school began, I saw the Tomky children marching up the hill with paper sacks in their hands. The son was one grade lower than me, and the daughter was one grade higher. We never spoke, but I would pass them in the halls from time to time and attempt to view the world through their eyes. What must it be like to be so ignorant and alone? Could a normal person even imagine it? Staring at an Elmer Fudd lunchbox, I tried to diverse myself from everything I already knew. Elmer's inability to pronounce the letter R, his constant pursuit of an intelligent and considerably more famous rabbit. I tried to think of him as just a drawing, but it was impossible to separate him from his celebrity. One day, in class, a boy named William began to write the wrong answer on the blackboard, and our teacher failed her arms, saying, "Warning, Will, danger, danger." Her voice was synthetic and void of emotion, and we laughed knowing that she was imitating the robot in a weekly show about a family who lived in outer space. The Tomkeys, though, would have thought she was having a heart attack. It occurred to me that they needed a guide, someone who could accompany them through the course of an average day and point out all the things they were unable to understand. I could have done it on weekends, but friendship would have taken away their mystery and interfered with the good feeling I got from treating them. So I kept my distance. In early October, the Tomkeys bought a boat, and everyone seemed greatly relieved, especially my mother's friend, who noted that the motor was definitely second hand. It was reported that Mr. Tomkey's father-in-law owned a house on the lake and had invited the family to use it whenever they liked. This explained why they were gone all weekend, but it did not make their absences any easier to bear. I felt as if my favorite show had been cancelled. Halloween fell on a Saturday that year, and by the time my mother took us to the store, all the good costumes were gone. My sisters dressed as witches, and I went as a hobo. I would looked forward to go in disguise to the Tomkeys' door, but they were off at the lake and their house was dark. Before leaving, they had left a coffee can full of gumdrops on the front porch, alongside a sign reading, "Don't be greedy." In terms of Halloween candy, individual gumdrops were just above as low as you could get. This was evidenced by the large number of them floating in an adjacent dog bowl. It was disgusting to think that this was what a gumdrop might look like in your stomach, and it was insulting to be told not to take too much of anything you didn't really want in the first place. "Who do these Tomkeys think they are?" my sister Lisa said. The night after Halloween, we were sitting around watching TV when the doorbell rang. Visitors were infrequent at our house, so while my father stayed behind, my mother, sisters, and I ran downstairs in a group, opening the door to discover the entire Tomkey family on our front stoop. The parents looked as they always had, but the son and daughter were dressed in costumes. She as a ballerina and he as some kind of a rodent with terry cloth ears and a tail made from what looked to be an extension cord. It seemed they had spent the previous evening isolated at the lake and had missed the opportunity to observe Halloween. "So, well, I guess we are trick-or-treating now, if that's okay," Mr. Tomkey said. I attributed their behavior to the fact that they didn't have a TV, but television didn't teach you everything. Asking for candy on Halloween was called trick-or-treating, but asking for candy on November 1st was called begging, and it made people uncomfortable. This was one of the things you were supposed to learn simply by being alive, and it angered me that the Tomkeys did not understand it. "Why, of course, it's not too late," my mother said. "Kids, why don't you run and get the candy?" "But the candy is gone," my sister Gretchen said. "You gave it away last night." Not that candy, my mother said. The other candy. Why don't you run and go get it? You mean our candy? Lisa said. The candy that we earned? This was exactly what our mother was talking about. But she didn't want to say this in front of the Tomkeys. In order to spare their feelings, she wanted them to believe that we always kept a bucket of candy lying around the house, just waiting for someone to knock on the door and ask for it. Go on now, she said. Hurry up. My room was situated right off the foyer, and if the Tomkeys had looked in that direction, they could have seen my bed and the brown paper bag marked My Candy Keep Out. I didn't want them to know how much I had, and so I went into my room and shut the door behind me. Then I closed the curtains and emptied my bag onto the bed, searching for whatever was the crumpiest. All my life, chocolate had made me ill. I don't know if I am allergic or what, but even the smallest amount leaves me with a blinding headache. Eventually, I learned to stay away from it, but as a child, I refused to be left out. The brownies were eaten, and when the pounding began, I would blame the grape juice, or my mother's cigarette smoke, or the tightness of my glasses. Anything but the chocolate. My candy bars were poisoned, but they were brand name, and so I put them in pile number 1, which definitely would not go to the Tomkeys. Out in the hallway, I could hear my mother straining for something to talk about. A boat? She said. That sounds marvelous. Can you just drive it right into the water? Actually, we have a trailer, Mr. Tomkey said. So what we do is back it into the lake. Oh, a trailer. What kind is it? Well, it's a boat trailer, Mr. Tomkey said. Right. But is it wooden or, I guess what I am asking is, what style trailer do you have? Behind my mother's words were 2 messages. The first and most obvious was, yes, I am talking about boat trailers, but also I am dying. The second meant only for my sisters and me as, if you do not immediately step forward with that candy, you will never again experience freedom, happiness, or the possibility of my warm embrace. I knew that it was just a matter of time before she came into my room and started collecting the candy herself, grabbing indiscriminately with no regard to my rating system. Had I been thinking straight, I would have hidden the most valuable items in my dresser drawer. But instead, panicked by the thought of her hand on my doorknob, I tore off the wrappers and began cramming the candy bars into my mouth, desperately like someone in a contest. Most were miniature, which made them easier to accommodate, but still there was only so much room and it was hard to chew and fit more in at the same time. The headache began immediately and I chalked it up to tension. My mother told the Tomkeys she needed to check on something, and then she opened the door and stuck her head inside my room. What the hell are you doing? She whispered, but my mouth was too full to answer. I'll just be a moment, she called, and as she closed the door behind her and moved towards my bed, I began breaking the wax lips and candy necklaces pulled from pile number 2. These were the second best things I had received. And while it hurt to destroy them, it would have hurt even more to give them away. I had just started to mutilate a miniature box of Red Hots when my mother pried them from my hands, accidentally finishing the job for me. BB-size pellets clattered onto the floor, and as I followed them with my eyes, she snatched up a roll of Nico wafers. Not those, I pleaded. But rather than words, my mouth expelled chocolate, chewed chocolate, which fell onto the sleeve of a sweater. Not those, not those. She shook her arm and the mound of chocolate dropped like a horrible turd upon my bedspread. You should look at yourself, she said. I mean, really look at yourself. Along with the Nico wafers, she took several Tootsie Pops and a half a dozen caramels wrapped in cellophane. I heard her apologize to the Tomkeys for her absence, and then I heard my candy hitting the bottom of their bags. "What do you say?" Mrs. Tomkey asked, and the children answered, "Thank you." While I was in trouble for not bringing my candy sooner, my sisters were in more trouble for not bringing theirs at all. We spent the early part of the evening in our rooms. Then, one by one, we eased our way back upstairs and joined our parents in front of the TV. I was the last to arrive and took a seat on the floor beside the sofa. The show was a western, and even if my head had not been throbbing, I doubt I would have had the wherewithal to follow it. A pose of outlaws crested a rocky hilltop, squinting at a flurry of dust advancing from the horizon, and I thought again of the Tomkeys and of how alone and out of place they have looked in their topsy costumes. "What was up with that kid's tail?" I asked. "Shh," my family said. For months I had protected and watched over these people, but now, with one stupid act, they had turned my pity into something hard and ugly. The shift wasn't gradual but immediate, and it provoked an uncomfortable feeling of loss. We hadn't been friends, the Tomkeys and I, but still I had given them the gift of my curiosity. Wondering about the Tomkey family had made me feel generous, and now I would have to shift gears and find pleasure in hating them. The only alternative was to do as my mother had instructed and take a good look at myself. This was an old trick designed to turn one's hatred inward, and while I was determined not to fall for it, it was hard to shake the mental picture snapped by her suggestion. Here is a boy sitting on a bed, his mouth smeared with chocolate. He is a human being, but also he is a pig surrounded by trash and gorging himself on that others may be denied. Were this the only image in the world, you would be forced to give it your full attention. But fortunately, there were others. This stagecoach, for instance, coming round the bend with a cargo of gold. This shiny new Mustang convertible. This teenage girl, her hair a beautiful mane, sipping Pepsi through a straw, one picture after another, on and on until the news and whatever came on after the news. Thank you.